Warning. It is advisable that people understand that any rhetoric that encourages you to hyper-vilify and dehumanize others, aka your chosen or perceived quote-unquote enemy, along with anyone else that disagrees with you. This kind of rhetoric, this kind of ideology, this kind of belief structure is, in actuality and in reality, an insidiously sinister form of psychological manipulation that is psychologically manipulating you. Now, I say that in the generalist, broadest, vaguest, theoretical sense of the term you. I'm not accusing anyone in particular of anything. I'm saying, as a warning, that I am of the humble opinion that any rhetoric that encourages an individual or a group of individuals or a collective of like-minded individuals to hyper-vilify, dehumanize, judge, belittle, ostracize, target, and come after some perceived or chosen enemy, as well as anyone that disagrees with you for doing so, that kind of rhetoric, that kind of ideology, regardless and or irregardless, whichever the most grammatically correct term is, of its origins or context, that ideology is corrupt. It is corrupted by an ongoing effort to manipulate individuals towards extreme violence. And now, friends, let us kick off the show. It's news, breaking news, a special segment of the Almost Daily ZenCast.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled brainwashing in order to bring you news, breaking news. A special segment of the Almost Daily ZenCast, focused on curious, quirky, and quixotic news items that you may have missed during the last 48-hour news cycle. Hosted by me, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.
Hello, and namaste. Welcome, friends. It is with a heavy heart today that I welcome you and invoke the Imaginarium space that we co-create when we share these quote-unquote podcast experiences in the center of your mind between your two ear holes as the audio waves that I am engineering are delivered to you vis-a-vis a technology so sophisticated we take it for granted and don't pretend it would make most everyone in our family tree before us quiver with fear, for it looks and appears and behaves a bit like dark magic. I digress. That's an attempt at humor on a very dark morning. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, and good morning to you, dear friends, wherever you are from around this beautiful, orbiting, living gem of life itself, whether it's the middle of the day, the middle of the afternoon, the middle of the evening, the middle of the night, or the very cusp of dawn when you're tuning in. I thank you for doing so, and I welcome you. to the shared mind space, where, as you may or may not remember, as you may already or may not already be aware, you are humbly encouraged, invited, and sort of magically invoked to set aside your usual stereotype, fundamental, borderline, unconscious set of assumptions, knee-jerk responses, ideological attachments, political party affiliations, and other labels and imaginary mental constructs that may typically filter your perceptions and your self-expression. In other words, stand as an obstacle between you and the rest of reality. Set them aside. I don't ask you to hate them or burn them or destroy them or throw them away or swear affiliation to anything else. I just ask you to gently send them aside. Imagine, if you would, you were coming in to a book club meeting in a very nice, posh, fancy library where you're invited to attend a free, margaritas and mimosas, catered brunch, book review discussion panel, except that it's my podcast, and there's no brunch, and there's no champagne, unless you provide those things for yourself in some sort of extra special luxury, personal, private ritual of like, when I listen, I don't always listen to the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's almost daily ZenCast, but when I do, let me tell you, I prep myself a delightful little Sunday brunch with a pitcher of mimosas, and I really dive deep. Hey, if that's the way you're going to roll, friends, I'm going to celebrate that. Okay, enough comedy, enough humor, enough weirdness. Let us take a moment to really talk through, in a thoughtful, mindful, dare I say, contemplative manner, the most recent of yet another mass shooting, gun violence incident. As I tweeted and or posted, I forget. Well, I often sort of recycle my own things from one platform to the other in order to share them that way, and then I'll add like different commentary, and I'll forget which one was which and when and what iteration. But it was this most recent incident that many people are sort of gonna only wake up to today, which happened, from what I understand, in local time, mid-afternoon, yesterday, in Buffalo, New York. So relatively late for anyone west of that, and potentially too early for anyone, further east of that in the global radius of our 24-hour time zone cycle of being spread out and far apart. But I digress. A particularly gnarly mass shooting, or if you prefer, gun violence incident, the details of which are being thoroughly, dare I say, maybe hyper over reported on all media. It's the spotlight of the weekend. It will certainly punctuate the month. Pun not intended, but suddenly realized after the words tumbled out of my mouth. But friends, I invoke you to. I welcome you to the show, and I invite you to get comfortable and settle in and consider my thinking, my concern on the subject as an observer of American pop culture and week to week news coverage, real time current events for some darn near, depending on how soft ball you're rounding up, darn near 50 years. I mean, I'm not pretending that I've been here for 50 years. I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to mislead you. But I have been paying attention to what's going on in American pop cultural life vis-a-vis most of the media platforms available to your average Joe Schmo since Ronald Reagan was in office. And some might perceive that as a humble flex. Some might perceive that as some sort of snide self-elitism and snobbery. Some might, perceive that as some kind of just, pointless flex that just dates me and makes me sound old. But it's just a matter of fact to me. I remember Ronald Reagan in office, and I remember quite clearly being fascinated and intrigued by the political back and forth, the seeming tug-of-war game. That was my first political analogy as a very young person arriving here from afar as a foreigner, as a non-participant politically, because I had 3 strikes against me, being a minor, being an immigrant that was, not becoming a citizen. And I'm a permanent legal resident alien, right? And being from a different timeline / dimension / planet, which is, they never really quite could wrap their brains around that at the time. But it's like, I'm not from another planet. I'm from another planet, Earth. I mean, it really depends on which timeline you're in. But the young kids will be hip to it, right? Like, future generations will get it, because multiversal thinking is now like brimming at the top of like cutting edge pop cultural content, and will soon be as deeply normalized and culturally embedded as some things have become in American life, like why ask why, drink but dry. There's generations of people for whom that instantly invokes a cultural landmark, perhaps personal nostalgic experiences of good old times with their good old boys in the good old bar or whatever, and or specific commercial, maybe really particularly the one with the frogs. Why ask why? Drink but dry. But and I'm not trying to do a promo. Please don't sue me, and don't. That was not a tacit endorsement of any brand of beer or alcohol in general. Put a pin in that on the board. We've talked about problematic issues around that sort of stuff on various occasions, and I'm sure we'll come full circle again to do like some real deep discussions about it on point, as on titular point, which is a fun way of saying it will be in the title. On titular point. It will be on point, and it will be what the title is about, right? I always fear that, like, it's hard for me to say, like, oh, I talked about this subject on an episode, and that episode is titled something completely ridiculously unrelated different. Like, I'm discussing some deep spiritual thing, and I'll be like, yeah, there's a pin on the board about that. I don't remember which episode. If I suddenly then spat out, like, McCarthyism then and now, what's wrong with the Republican Party, as a title, people will be like, wait, what? But it's because I'm very tangential. And my content, whether it's my written content, like my poetry or my sci-fi, or my personal worldview, public opinion essays, or my podcast, or my narrative chatter on my live stream content, whether I'm doing art or gaming or just a chit-chat talk show where I'm sitting around chit-chatting and talking, I spiral in and out of things. For some people's tastes, I spiral out of control. For other people's tastes, that make perfect sense, and they think like, oh, I can synchronize with that, and it all makes sense, and I see dots connecting, right? And they might characterize that like, no, you make perfect sense. It's not a straight line, but whoop, there it is. It's a spiral of some kind. That's just the way my mind works, folks. Having said that, it's never pleasant. It's never fun. It's never funny. It's never good. It's never exciting to have to receive the real world reality news that yet another mass shooting gun violence incident has occurred here in America, and that it is yet again quickly confirmed to be by the perpetrator's own admission racially motivated. And pink elephant in the room no one's really talking about, or no one's really stabbing at or critiquing, in my humble opinion, completely pointless. Like, what did it do? Nothing. Achieved nothing. Besides causing terror in the broadest, genericest sense of the term. But do people really go from innocent, sweet child born of whatever circumstances into whatever circumstances, through whatever circumstances, growing up, and suddenly turn and literally think to themselves, you know what I'll do? I'll commit one random, stupid, dumb act of quote-unquote American terrorism or, racial hate, hate crime, gun violence, terrorism, and I become famous, infamous? I guess there must be some rationale. I've heard this reported out before, but it doesn't make sense to me. But I guess it can make sense to people. Incite a riot and or a quote-unquote race war. None of those things are things I agree with, endorse, or would tolerate in real life. And I would argue in public discourse. I would make, stands in public life against those things. And, if they brought it, if there was ever a thing that was going to bring us to a real Civil War II, the American sequel, it might very well be the exponentially increasing, totally useless, totally mindless, totally not very well thought out, almost copycat, rubber stamp, repetitive, and impotent use of gun violence in this fashion. If I may be so way the fuck out there in whatever field, because I'm not out there in left field, right? I'm not a left winger. And I think a lot of traditional dyed-in-the-wool, true blue, Dodger fan left-wingers would look at me and be like, what the hell are you talking about on some issues? And would kind of naturally agree and just nod along on a bunch of others in the way that I describe them. I'm somewhere else, and I'll if you're new to the show, friends, welcome to the chaos, and I'll guide you. Just follow the sound of my voice, and I'll lead you to the audio aquatic pool of cleansing slate DJ Z waters as we pause for a moment to literally cleanse the mental slate by imbibing of the work of the animatronic literary fictional character DJ Z. He's from another dimension, different than my own, actually. We sort of bumped into each other in a trans-dimensional way stop of time, space, and have been roommates and travel cabin buddies, and co-creators and collaborators in all things artistique since then. And together we bring you Discotheque Synthetica. Friends, let us turn back to the subject. DJ Zed, forgive me, I'm going to gently slide the slider bar on your output level until it's at 0, and then we're going to dive back into this discussion. But wait, I do want to tease out this song. This is actually a 9-minute long track, so you're only getting just the teaser at the beginning here, friends. And this one is indeed going to be heading on over to solo.to. No, sorry, that's the big tree. This is heading on over to the SoundCloud page. Either later today or later tomorrow. I will pause it right there. And if I remember to not click on any other thing on here on the Sprecher.com podcast platform app on my iPad mini. No, is this an iPad 6th gen? Forgive me. It always gets upset at me when I call it the wrong name. The wrong Mac product label. It's an iPad 6th gen. And it's size-wise, it's somewhere in between the mini and the whatever the next size up after this, but it doesn't matter. I digress. First, please, dear friends, let's take a moment of silence, and I invoke this in all seriousness. Anyone listening who does not believe in the power of prayer, I respect that. Question your beliefs. Why don't you believe in the power of prayer? And in what way are you conceiving of prayer? Which kind of prayer are you choosing not to believe in? There are kinds of prayers that I'm like, that's a bunch of nonsense. Don't do that. That's a waste of your time. There's a lot of things that are called prayer that are categorically, in my humble spiritual opinion, not prayer in any way, shape, or form. They're conditioning. It's mumbo jumbo. It's marketing. It's ideological brainwashing, hogwash. But in other things, in other words, in other forms, there are things that are not necessarily considered prayers that truly, beautifully, wonderfully are. But put a pin in that on the corkboard, or look up at the corkboard and realize there's a pin already up there. I've done at least 2-part episode on like prayer, if not a couple of different times. I'm sure there are sidebars sprinkled throughout the podcast, throughout all of its many episodes, where I at least touch on the subject. So I invite you seriously, if you don't believe in prayer, respect that others do and participate. Respect that to a believer, it means something if you, fully not believing in the power of prayer, participate with us anyways. We don't disrespect your non-belief. We just ask you to set it aside. Take a moment of silence and join us in sending love and energy to all those victims, souls, and families who are impacted by gun violence in this incident in New York, this incident and the incidents around the world that are happening on the regular basis. Because gun violence is more than the things that it is sensationalistly depicted on the news. But if, do your own research, don't take my word for it. Look at the hard numbers and know that these are probably low-balled numbers. There's plenty of unreported incidences and deaths and whatnot. Okay, so friends, for those of us who do believe in the power of prayer, let us join together in our metaphysical, spiritual, transcendental frequencies and powers and concentrate our energies to be broadcast along the spiritual network of the human species so that anyone and everyone, whether we know them or have heard about it on the news or not, whether, we can imagine them or not, receive our healing love and forgiveness energies. Not that victims need to be forgiven. Put a pin or mark the pin on the board for forgiveness. We think about forgiveness all wrong, and we can forgive in such nuanced and more specific ways than just bad person, beg for forgiveness. And yet, even at that level, the victims need the strength and the power to forgive the perpetrators of the gun violence and whatever other kind of violence is perpetrated on them And therefore, that's what we do in the silence, right? We pray for them. We send them our love. We send them our forgiveness energy. And we pray for their healing. So join me in a moment of that, dear friends. Amen and namaste. Thank you for indulging in that and participating in that. The public discourse around gun violence as a subject matter is stunted and short-sighted and limited in the circles it's allowed to tread. And we've tread a very well-worn path, right? The meme that's included in the cover for this episode is a independent and unauthorized collaboration. I can't even read the signature that's on the meme, and I found the meme being shared, I forget when, forever ago, whenever, obviously not before the date in the photo, in the whiteboard and the signature, but not terribly long after that, like the same year as that date, which I don't have in front of me, and I don't remember what it is right now, but and I realized like spot on, but I wanted to add stuff, and I wanted to change the thing at the top and the title. I don't remember what's underneath it. Somewhere I have the original image, and sometimes I like to put them side by side because I think the two images together have some impact. And I beg the respect and forgiveness of whoever originally created and shared that meme of, by taking the photograph of that handwritten infogram on the dry whiteboard, erasable whiteboard thing. We aren't talking beyond the scope of this gun violence cycle. In fact, most people aren't even conversantly cognizant of the cycle. Many will resist and or disagree any claim or in any statement that things are getting more intense, and they'll write it off as paranoid, myopic, negative thinking, etc., all kinds of things. I've been really blunt and frank about my thoughts on this issue on the podcast before, and I'm going to do so again by touchstoning a meme from the social medias an original meme, one that I created and originally posted June 19th, 2014 on Instagram. I recently reshared it on other social media things in response to and in light of this weekend's most recent incident, which I have many complicated response, both emotional and intellectual. I have a very complicated and complex set of responses to it. But I've been sitting here sort of dilly-dallying, and thank goodness it's not like 2 p.m. yet, which will happen, right? Like one of the things, the news broke yesterday, already late in the day, and that was like the third thing that had derailed me that day from jumping into any of my various content creation projects. Speaking of which, got to do the 30-second self-promotion. If you appreciate the thoughtful discussion and public discourse that goes on in this show, even if it also is surrounded by ingredients of sci-fi fantasy, improv, audio tape shenanigans that sometimes don't make any freaking sense. But if you dig it, you appreciate it, and you think there's value, and you are in the position to support the show through a reasonable, gift donation that makes sense to you, please do find our ko-fi.com/Mr. Zeppo link over on solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. You can just go straight to Ko-fi if you want, but it would be more awesomeness, hot sauce for my social media algorithming lifestyle profile moving forward. That head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. You can check out all the crazy things I'm doing besides this podcast, which are all sort of at least co-branded together. They all belong in the same fictional, literary, imaginary, creative, artistic universe. The podcast is very much my real-life thoughts on real-life world events, and me sort of sharing with you how I'm interconnecting those things with the world, the fictional world of many worlds that I'm building over on a different platform. You can explore it all on solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Thank you so much. I apologize, it's horrible in them, but I had to drop one in there somewhere. First, let me take a deep breath and invite you to do the same. Like, let's all take a really big, deep breath. It does not matter to me personally. Sort of like that I don't care about your Bible lady. The lady that's, I don't care about your Bible. I think she's a newscaster somewhere, and she's just fed up, right? And she's like, do what you want, believe what you want, but I don't care. And you don't have the right to dictate it to me. I'm not dictating anything to you. I'm the same way about this. I want to preemptively stop anyone that might be like, all right, what is this fool going to talk about? What's he really going to say? And thinking that I'm anti-gun. I don't give a fuck. Pardon the F-bomb. I challenge anyone to find in my public record of ongoing social media discourse the direct personal claim or the direct personal quote of me calling for the action of the banning of all guns or the removal of guns. Never have I ever supported that nonsense. What I have done and what I'm doing now and what I shall always continue to do is point out that whole chain of events, let me be more clear. Separate from the real life incidents that happen are the trends of meme driven, meme shared, conspiracy theory like, or conspiracy theory light, if you will, content And then the crazier, deeper conspiracy theory stuff that all sometimes connects with. Okay? And that's what I'm sort of calling out. I have zero issue with the object machine. And it's a machine, right? It isn't a solid object. My coffee cup is an object. A gun is a moderate level of complexity machine. Let's just be really clear. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. It's not an innocent object like a shoebox. It is a complicated, dangerous, and deadly object that should be handled as it was once very commonly understood, not only with respect for it, but for others around you. And like a diligence and a self mastery of what's it called? There's the word. I'm just totally blanking. Discipline. Why am I blanking on the word discipline? Okay. I don't have a problem with this complicated machine of mass destruction. I just am really blunt about it. Do I hate guns? No. Am I a leftist, socialist, anti-gunist that wants to take all your guns away? F no. And I'm really annoyed when I'm accused of being that, because I'm not. Have I shot guns before? I mean, depends on not anything particularly high caliber. But I have, as a young person, was taught how to shoot like high-powered airsoft rifles, right, with metal pellets and stuff, and taught safety and discipline about it, as if I was taught in the vein of like, this is how you would get taught about a real weapon, right? Like, you don't fuck around. If there was ever a place and a time and an object and an issue around which one does not fuck around and find out, it's guns and like samurai swords, because they are deadly. Like, a samurai sword is a deadly object, more appropriately viewed from afar as a work of brutally deadly art than a toy to be swung about with like a wiffle bat, right? And if a child were to start, well, I want to play with it, and it was like a real samurai, you would snatch that child up in your arms and be like, no, you don't run up to people's private samurai sword collections and want to swing it around like your plastic lightsaber at home. Okay? You would do that to a person of any age. Never mind, strike the word child. Or use it in the sense of like, imagine yourself, you were a parent and your child was of whatever the F age, 29. And they were like, hey, cool dude, look at this person's samurai sword. And they were like literally about to unsheath it and dance about in it around the room like the Jedi lightsaber kid on YouTube. Like, you wouldn't. And if you were the parent of that child, you would be judged as a moron, no offense, if you laughed and giggled and let them. And, of course, quite ironically, you probably would suffer the consequences of standing too close to them if you did. The same goes for the machine of death that is a gun. And I don't say that in a evil vilification, we must remove them all, destroy them all. No, I don't give a fuck. I mean, we must acknowledge it is that. It's not a costume, apparel, fashion piece to be brandished about at Starbucks or at the local grocery store. To bring us almost full circle. Like, the gentleman in question, the young man, the child, because he's what, barely 18 or 19? And if we're talking about different set of circumstances and a different gender, they would definitely be be heavily characterized as a child, right? But I digress. This is a completely different set of issues. But this child, legally acquired, like why? I've never understood. America, you won't let kids. You let kids drive at 21. Drinking. I mean, sorry, not driving. You let kids drive at 18, but you like, and they're still kids. I was a kid at 21. I can say that without any conflict of interest or blemish of hypocrisy. I was a kid still. I thought like a child pretending to be an adult, trying to manage the situation, having just barely been long enough alive and in the same body to qualify as one. Let me pause here and indicate a very deeply interrelated sidebar, which I think may be new to the show. If I've stumbled into rambling about this somewhere, I wouldn't know where to find it, and I doubt you'd come across it, without a completionist approach, of which I totally hope for, but I don't expect from anyone. The thing that I'm about to say was like, let's put a pin on the board here. Dear America and world, dear humanity at large, we need to have a really slow, gentle discussion about what things are really age appropriate, when, really, and we need to reevaluate and adjust our legal age boundaries on a lot of things. And I would say starting with all computing devices. Yes, I think it's clever and smart to empower young people with the education to be savvy enough to learn coding and stuff really early and whatnot. And that's great. 9-year-old coders that can do things that are crazier than what, the entrepreneurs of the 70s did sounds like a great idea until you realize no one stopped to filter, prevent, and or contemplate the very notion that with that access of computing comes everything else that's toxic and horrible about our postmodern, semi-digitized lifestyle culture commodification thing that we call monstrosity, that we call the internet. But I digress, right? What brought this 19-year-old, and for a journey like that to happen, it didn't happen in 4 weeks. Did it happen in 4 months? It's plausible. But I figure 3 years is the believable overnight framework for something like that. And let me be really blunt. When it comes to talking about individuals and the incidents of gun violence and those perpetrators, I don't pretend to be an expert on any particular case or any particular trend but I am speaking from my own experience as a keen observer, an amateur, admittedly, very passionately curious, but not a professional journalist by any means of the imagination. And so I'm acknowledging my commentary is in the broad strokes and speculative. What brings a young person of that age to go to the expense and obvious risk to commit such an atrocious act? Back in the day, the knee-jerk, blind, normalized, culturally confusing response was, duh, it's movies and video games, man. With or without any number of additional ride-along conspiracy theory modification bumpers you could add to it, but just straight up, oh, it's all video games and movies' fault. I don't know, dude. But I'm literally like almost 60, and I've watched James Bond action adventure genre movies since I was a kid. Probably a little too early. But action movies of every kind. Poetic, meaningful, thoughtful, pointless, gory, violent, funny. And I've played video games. I'm an old school gamer. Although not necessarily a very in-depth and previous, up until now, previously like very diverse in all the gaming. In fact, there's way more games I never played than games I actually played. But I've self-identified as one who appreciates and supports and enjoys video games as an entertainment market. And one who aspired, hoping one day to maybe like get into some facet of the production side, the development side, the creation side of it, because I see video games as a powerful storytelling tool. Point on the board up there, we're going to have a spin-off to Totally Irrelevant Media Review special sub-series of the Almost Daily ZenCast, which will be like where the gaming chit-chat will talk, that bridges and connects the world of what I'm doing on Twitch, and what I'm doing here and what I'm doing elsewhere in the Zeppoverse. And I bring that up specifically to get an opportunity to introduce Twitch as a platform and an idea, and no infringement intended on any kind and any part. I was truly, genuinely disappointed, shocked, a little betrayed even. Like I felt betrayed by the perpetrator. As a member of the community, I was disgusted to find out the news as they were breaking developments that this individual that committed this mass shooting yesterday, which has already been widely reported, and you can get all the details about that on any fucking news platform. Just type in Tops Buffalo mass shooting. But this kid, and this is sensitive to me, and it's difficult to talk about, and forgive me for bringing to you this kind of topic that becomes dark no matter how you approach it. This kid live streamed the entire event. It's been taken down, and apparently it was taken down rather quickly. And of course, this will spark and reignite all kinds of wild, multifaceted debates about regulation, and there'll be pro-regulatory, movements, and then there'll be the anti-legislation, free speech defenders, backlash, etc. And that echo chamber of echo chambers will resonate with its new wave of crazy. But if there's one thing that this does, is that it brings to society's attention the reality that individuals are, for complicated and complex reasons, coming to the very faulty, erroneous, wrong, immoral conclusion, mental calculation, repeated thought process, which becomes belief, which, because I don't know, for those of you who've never heard it, there's I don't know if it's new or if it's ancient, but a friend recently posted the statement in their own words that belief is just a thought we say to ourselves over and over again. Right? Belief systems are just well-rutted thinky thoughts that we refuse to stop thinking. That's my own DJ Zeppo remix. The the pattern of events, from my perspective, indicates to me that there's, and people will disagree and argue that let me just lay out what I'm perceiving as a sort of cyclical series of events. Right? That's sort of like the combination of that meme I was talking about earlier and my own thoughts. There's a gun violence incident. And then there's media hyper coverage, hyper fixated coverage. There's a hyper fixation in the media coverage of a given incident. Then there's right wing political fear mongering. And I'm editing as I go. I'm realizing I'm updating my own statement. There's before that there's thoughts and prayers, and the response of mourning and the political capitalization of like we are the leaders you lean on when these sorts of things happen. Then there's right wing fear mongering, just barely enough time to grieve, and then boom, they're coming to take your guns. And actually, some start. There's a chorus of that raging all the time, way in the right wing background. But it starts to crescendo and it peaks, right? And then it's said out loud, really blatantly from the top down, which is what I'm concerned about. The next bit is critical. There's no actual change. There's thoughts and prayers and Facebook debates, but no actual change. There's Thanksgiving dinners ruined. There's, relationships put to the stress test, but no actual change. Congress does nothing. The executive branch does nothing. The presidential branch. If we're going to call it the congressional branch, we should call it the presidential branch. And then the judicial branch, the branch of judges. The judicial branch really can't do anything. I guess whatever it could do, it doesn't. And in the gaps between all of that, we can see the pink elephant in the room. The red gunmetal. What's that movie? Full Metal Jacket elephant in the room. Massive spikes in gun and ammo sales. In between each of those beats I just covered that play out after any given gun violence, mass shooting like incident, an incident that is similar to what happened yesterday in Buffalo, New York, where a person of whatever ethnicity decides to strap up, lock it and load it, and go take out their anxiety and their stress and their fear on a group of people somewhere. I mean, we used to jokingly call it going postal because it curiously was happening a lot in the post office for a hot minute. Massive profits for the industry. Does that mean the industry's behind it? I don't know. Is the oil industry directly, confirmably, immediately, personally responsible for the oil market crisis we're going through right now? Maybe. I don't know. I won't pretend to have, pardon the punny analogy, a smoking gun pile of evidence, like I don't. And I won't pretend that any of my logic is so airtight and flawless that I can claim to know for certain that I am absolutely right. And anyone who disagrees with me is absolutely wrong. I don't play those games. But here's my concern. It's clear, it's easily looked up. Gun violence incidents year over year are growing in a sort of fractal logarithmic way that makes me think of disease and disease spread just at a different scale, right? And undeniably, the gun industry profits from these trends and under-highlighted, although occasionally poked at by journalists and whatnot, because I don't believe they are a monolith of evil. Is there corruption? Absolutely. Let's not even go. We've talked about that. It's up on the board. We'll talk about it again. We'll talk about it again, but from a slightly different angle, a slightly different direction right here. So I posted this meme recently on social media. I've posted several. The one that's in the cover is based on that image that I found, I don't know how many years ago. The one that the conversation that led me to the comments that I made that I wove together into that meme's structure just now, if you're wondering why that meme visually doesn't exactly look like what I just read or said, it's because I was combining the two things. There's this other meme. Okay. My caption for it is 60 years of fear-mongering has led us here. The meme itself is a black and white meme with my classic television square box meme frame, which seriously, Instagram, how long are we going? I mean, I've got to add extra steps and do graphic design layout stuff for everything I want to post on Instagram because y'all took away the curvy, perfect, awesome black image frame that was built in and part of, was it Pro X2 filter? You updated the filter, took away the frame, kept the vignette shadowing, but I need that frame, yo. So now I've got to I had to replicate it. It added so many steps. This meme is from back in the day when they still had it. There's a black and white image of a Bible, and you really have to sort of pay attention and look through the words to realize it's a Bible. But anyone who knows their Bibles would kind of understand it is. There's a Bible. On top of the Bible, there's money, what looks like to be $100 bills off to the right, and occupying most of the image frame to the left and centered to the left is a gun. The words on the meme read as follows. You are being manipulated. All caps. Manipulated is in all caps. Exclamation point. They want you to live in fear, ... And then there's a list, ... of other races, of other political ideas, of other races. Did I say that? Did I fuck it up? You are being manipulated. Take 3. Take 2. You are being manipulated. They want you to live in fear of other races, of other political ideas, of other religions, of each other, of the very idea of peace. And they want you trigger happy. The more rounds fired, the higher their profit margin on every shooting. Now, I mean, is your friend Bubba down at the local gun shop an evil, manipulative, puppet for some horrible cabal of warmongering profiteers? Probably not. He's probably just your friend Bubba, working a job, and he likes guns. Right? Just like your other friend Billy is just a guy working a job as a lawyer, and your friend Larita is a doctor. You know what I mean? Like, people are people, and they're working their jobs. But there's clearly, coming from somewhere, which I don't pretend to know, like, this group over there, they're the ones responsible. Like, it's not about that. I'm just saying the evidence is clear that some concerted effort from somewhere, from some corners of society, are being clearly brought to bear on the cultural dialogue, the public discourse. And it's obvious, right? Like, what's the most talked about problem of social media is that there's a bunch of garbage on it. And the real problem is sometimes people get really caught up in the garbage and they think it's real and they want to defend it with their lives. And it's just garbage. Like, garbage information. Just junk, made up garbage information. And the hard part is, who decides what is and what isn't when America has always been a belief-driven nation? Like, somebody asks me, do you believe in the Constitution and the Second Amendment? I'm like, do you believe in the moon? Now, they easily could have snarkily said, yes, obviously, duh, it's right there. I'm like, so it needs to be right there for you to believe in it? Then why do you believe in God? There's no right there about God. You can't point to God, but you believe in God? So, like, what the fuck is belief then? Sorry for the F-bombs. America is wrapped up in believing in belief. And I'm sure this is going on in other places, right? Like, that's what patriotism is. Wrapping yourself up in the belief that believing in your country is one of the most important beliefs worth believing in. It's patriotism and or, like, you know, confidence in society or confidence in the nation. Yes, there's some importance to that in terms of having a successful, functional society. But, well, there's a lot we could butt claws in ourselves into there. Let's back up. So this meme I originally posted in June 19th, 2014. But my concern around this has been percolating up into my real-life candid discussions on the issue, whether it's with school chums or teachers, during current events week or dates, when I started dating or people on the internet that I got into debates with before we even invented the term social media. People out in the world that I would meet and get into conversations with, random new bar friends at the bar. Like, for years now, for decades, I've been saying the following. It's clear to me that there's a concerted effort somewhere, coming from somewhere, to get Americans of a particular type, especially, all Americans, but particularly Americans of a particular type, and we'll put a pin in that in the temporary right now. We'll come right back to this in a hot second spot on the corkboard for what type of people that is. To be amped up, aggravated, foaming at the mouth with outrage, dismissing anything they're told to and anything that their disposition inclines them to disagree with as a hoax. Did I already say blind with outrage? Foaming at the mouth for action, strapped and armed to the teeth and willing to shoot first and deal with it later. is that much crazier to believe, or to even just consider and contemplate and go, let me look into that. Let me consider that concept, that it should be rejected out of hand more quickly than, intergalactic space traveling, blood drinking, baby eating, 9-foot tall space lizard people? Come on. And I'm not saying I hardcore don't believe in the space lizard people. I don't know. I've never been visited. And I've most certainly have asked the Intergalactic Council of Light to submit my impromptu psychic application to join the board, because if there really are baby eating lizard people, then I need to be on the I need to be a human on the Council of Intergalactic Light, or whatever the F I am, if I'm from some... Anyways, that gets into the literary part. The literature part of this project will eventually all make a lot more sense to anyone who's just sort of dipping their toes in the podcast. So stick with it. Stick with it. The story gets better and makes sense eventually. But back to this real life issue that I'm deeply concerned about. And there's a weird nexus here with the SCOTUS versus women anti-Roe versus Wade leaked decision issue. That was a complicated sentence to construct in terms of how do I describe the issue and how so I can make sense of the nexus. Take a hot moment to consider the following. To the best of my understanding, the argument at the core of this would-be ruling, which is yet to actually be handed down, yet, I believe, as of me talking right now, live on the air, 10:18 a.m. Sunday, May 15th, 2029. No, I'm kidding. 2022. I'm joking. 2020. What year is it? What the F year is it? It's 2022. Okay, cool. All right, I wasn't sure for a hot second. At the core of the argument being made by these hand-picked, arguably corruptly appointed, plainly, obviously, two-facedly hypocritical, lying, and that's no light claim. It's a matter of public record. They lied, all three of them, lied in their confirmation hearings. Explicitly about Roe versus Wade and whether or not it was settled law. They lied because they're saying the exact opposite now, as if they'd never wholeheartedly, enthusiastically agreed in the other direction. They always coulda, shoulda, woulda said they were against the act of blah, blah, blah. And that's the implicit implication in saying Roe versus Wade is settled law, which they all said. Roe versus Wade is settled law, which means it's set as precedent and it should be respected as such. And the judiciary only decides things when a serious case is brought up through the... Anyways, I don't want to get into the technicalities because I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on how the Supreme Court of the United States of America functions and its rules, etc. But I will critique this. Their argument is in part anchored on the notion that the word abortion is not mentioned in the Constitution, and that rights not explicitly called out, and this is critical, in the original constitutional document, singular, really shouldn't exist, so we should strike this down. They then very boldly, and in my opinion, two-facedly, and probably fictitiously or falsely or misleadingly, claim that this should not be any concern for any other issue. No other right is being addressed or viewed this way. This is just a decision about Roe versus Wade. Blah, blah, blah. Whatevs. You also said at your effing confirmation hearing, it wasn't a fucking book club meeting. It wasn't a confirmation brunch. It was a hearing under oath. They already lied about their legal opinion on whether or not Roe versus Wade is settled, standing law of the land that should be respected as such and not be activistedly, not be tampered with by an activist jury, or whatever they're called. What are they called? It's the Supreme Court of the United States, and they are called Supreme Court fascists. No, sorry, that was comedy. That was me just making a joke. They are called Supreme Court justices. Thank you. Sorry. So there's that whole issue right there. That should preemptively render the entire attempt moot and impossible. Like they should at the bare minimum, and I would think this is too weak, not exonerate themselves. That's what Trump does in his imagination all the time. What is it when you step aside? They should abdicate themselves. They should, oh God, I hate when words I know how to use the flashcard doesn't turn over. They should recuse themselves, thank you. They should recuse themselves from any and all cases having to do with Roe versus Wade because they lied about Roe versus Wade. And their supposed adherence to legal precedents about respecting it as law of the land because it is standing precedent and all the things, right? Okay, so never mind that. Pause and contemplate for a second with me. If they're serious about the first thing, the anchoring concept that for a right to exist, any right of whatever kind, of whatever mechanism, about whatever issue, about whatever group of people or whatever, for it to exist, it has to be explicitly spelled out in the original singular constitutional document, then the only people allowed to vote are landed gentry that own slaves, white men who own large plots of agricultural land, slaves, and that's it. Because the original document, the Constitution of the United States, counts slaves as 3/5 a person for the purposes of gaining aggregate representative power to slave owners versus entrepreneurs and business people who might own some property but don't own any slaves. The original constitutional document does not include any of the amendments, including, quite ironically and quite curiously, the right wing's beloved Second Amendment. So who's coming after whose guns now? But that's a whole weird, and it's purely speculative. Let's come back to this thing. And I was having this conversation, and this will be a little bit of a recursive revamp, but let me quote myself. Under the meme I posted, and I don't mean to be self-aggrandizing. I'm sharing my thoughts with you, and I already wrote this earlier, and I want to not get it wrong. An acquaintance of mine, whose name is immaterial, and so they shall remain anonymous, and whom I love, I send much love to, asked me stated that, now mind you, in the meme I say fear-mongering. And so, bless their hearts, and I don't mean that in the rude way, Southern way, I mean that in the polite Canadian way. They're not really grabbing what I'm thinking, at least based on this response, and they're really trying to state something that they believe in, that they think they got to stand up to. They said some fear is healthy. If you think giving up your guns to our government is wise, then I 100% disagree. And I laughed. Because literally, my friend, when WTF have I ever said give up your guns? Hell no. Here, I'm quoting myself now, right? Quote, when WTF have I ever said, quote, give up your guns? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Hell no, period. What I am saying is much more nuanced than that. In my opinion, to boil everything down to that particular what if, about what if the government wants to take our guns away, that scenario, that's still thinking from inside of the, quote, anti-gun versus pro-gun wedge issue, close identity label quote, right? That's a thing, my friends, to extemporize beyond what I had written there. That's a thing. There is an ongoing pro-gun versus anti-gun wedge issue. Have you seen my list of wedge issues meme? It's adorable. You should check it out. I won't stray so far as to go read it for you now. To continue with the conversation bit, this just tumbled out of me in response to my friend's statement, and sort of what I was like before I'd really even begun to think about what I was going to talk about today. This all came out, so I'm like, well, I guess I better incorporate this. Here we go. Continuing. What I am saying is much more nuanced than that. To boil everything down, okay, I already read that part. Ask yourself, and I invite you, dear audience, here and now, listening to the podcast episode, ask yourself, in all the decades of hearing the right-wing fearmongers scream, they're coming for your guns, when has anyone actually come and really tried to ban all the guns and take them all away? People will point to the California assault rifle ban. That was supported by state initiative. And I might remind you all, as proposed, had a built-in sunset clause, so was effectively, in long-term discussion, pointless. It was presented as a litmus test, as a scientific, social sciences, evidence-based test to be like, what happens if we ban just this tier of kind of really intense, highly effective, highly overly powerful, designed for war, not home defense, not hunting, and these are the really sort of level-headed, sane, grounded in reality arguments that the real gun legislation advocates are making. The hyperbolized, hypervilified, totally conjectured and projected, cartoonified, evil, satanic anti-gun activists as depicted to the right-wing base by the right wing was out to strip you of your guns, cornhole you in the butt, and then bury you alive with your children. God bless it. And a completely fabricated, exaggerated lie. There have been gun buybacks, yes. Not forcibly taking any, but offering money and food. Like, here's a $500 food card to Ralph's, right? To get guns off the streets. From whom? Underprivileged youth that don't need guns. And most of those gun buyback programs, something that Fox News totally ignores in their coverage, are targeting people who holding illegal guns. They're marketed towards, the buyback programs are explicitly designed to be like, hey, do you own illegal guns that you really shouldn't have because they don't have a serial number, have probably been used in other crimes before, and were smuggled around across state lines illegally, which most people on both sides of the political spectrum have a problem with. In fact, the right wing loves to complain about gun smuggling rings. But they bitch and moan about the buyback programs. Things that make you go, And also, WTF, right-wingers. Get it together, pick an effing lane. And I say that with love, but I'm frustrated. I'm 35 years worth of frustrated. I sat and watched Ronald Reagan hyper-vilify and dehumanize and objectify marginalized people instead of actually addressing the real root causes of the problems that lead people down the ego path to choosing violence. It's always been my fucking gripe. It's always been my complaint. That's what grinds my gears. That's what drives my content creation. That's what I bring to the public discourse, friends. We are wasting our time running on a treadmill of endless treadmill argumentation about anti-gun, pro-gun, take my guns away, let us have reasonable legislation. Fuck all that. Pardon the F-bomb. Let me back up a little bit and continue. That was all I just went off the rails. This is from the conversation I was having with my friend, and I say it with love, and I say it with respect. I really admire the person I shared this at, but they came to my page and posted that silly nonsense at me. I'm like, come on, bro, you know better. Also, this person's deeply spiritual and transcendental. They understand fractal metaphysics in a way that most people don't, even if they may not, to the best of my understanding. Maybe I'm projecting that on them, but I thought they did. But put a pin up on the temporary board. We'll come full circle to that again, hopefully, if I remember. If not in this episode now, whenever I rehash the episode a little later. The right-wing fearmongers will make any left-wing attempt at gun regulation sound like the work of the devil himself. But let's be really blunt and frank and real. They do that about anything and everything from the left by default now. Post-Trump, Trumpification, post-Trumptopianization, the default arsenal of intellectually dishonest tools is to just pretend, you must be a baby-eating lizard person pedophile, instead of actually engage in an intellectually honest discussion of the facts on the ground and the policies at hand and the ideas that might take us to innovative solutions. Okay? Now hear me out. Please hear me out, everyone in America and the world, really. This is my concern based on my own nonpartisan observation over the past 30, 35 years. The real pattern in America is actually the following. Whenever there's a gun incident, there's hyper media coverage, there's right-wing fear-mongering, then there's no actual change, and then there's a massive spike in gun and ammo sales and a massive profits for the industry. Then there's silence, and then there's another gun incident. Now, I already said that before. I'm recapping to drill back into this thread. Most people think this is kind of new, but it's been happening since I noticed it happening when I got here to this planet, to this country, back in the Ronald Reagan era when Ronald Reagan was the president. And let me point this out to you. Back then, and this is a hard pill to swallow, it was old then. This was not new. It was clear to me after a brief amount of observation that this was an entrenched problem already. Now, hear me out. let's zoom back to today, okay? We live in an environment where you say big oil or you name drop an oil company and everybody, knee-jerk understanding, instantaneous response, corruption. And all kinds of negative associated baggage, right? Big pharma, boom, corruption. Big tobacco, boom, corruption. Big real estate, boom, corruption. It's obvious, right? Everyone, quote, knows that, right? Right? But allow me, dear friends, to point out to you, as I have been for 30 years, and I've been called crazy and all sorts of other things for it, to name the one industry that most Americans will routinely and blindly leave off the list of big, evil, corrupt industries with a corruption problem. If you took a survey, if you walked around this country and asked America to name the 5 biggest areas of corruption in America, the gun industry won't make the list. It's been sanctified. And, I mean, in some extremes, it's been religious. It's been absorbed into the religious, brainwashing. There's a Rambo Jesus cult movement out there, folks. And I'm not kidding. It's madness, and I cannot agree. I cannot support. I cannot condone. So there is a nexus point. There's a convergence between the gun industry and the ethno-nationalist religious zealots that are worming their way into everything in this country. So they are worming their way into the gun industry and the gun lobbying industry and the right-wing political industry. The think tanks and the lobbyists and the politicians themselves. So we're getting this confluence of victimization conditioning, like, oh, woe is me, I'm a victim. I'm being penalized and marginalized and peer pressured for my beliefs in Jesus. While there is active sexist, chauvinist, racist, otherist conditioning implicit in those movements that make them, like what makes a movement an ethno-nationalist movement. Yeah. Obviously, I believe that their special ethno group is the nation's special ethno group and blessed specially above all other groups by their special ethno-nationalist God. Right? And for clarity, I am individual. I am a person that is of the mind, of the opinion, of the school of thought, of the phenomenological experience to back it up, to say to you, God has no politics. That which is really, truly God has no ideology of any kind. We invent that. It is not necessary to the divine being perpetuating reality. But I digress, right? So there is this bizarre, frightening confluence of corruption in a profiteering industry, corruption in a religious, ideological industry, and corruption in a political industry, and corruption in an industry of converting people to some form of ethno-nationalism, because there's like a whole variety of them trying to mishigas together. So no, friends, I am not one of those people that is blindly vilifying the object or the machine itself. It's a machine. It's a tool. I don't hate it. And for those of you paying attention, not only have I enjoyed lots of action movies, I aspire to create action-adventure content. There's no problem with it at a fantasy level of escapist entertainment. I explicitly would want to work with it in such a way as that it brings home the point of like, oh wow, yeah, butchering each other with machines of death, of murder, really doesn't solve anything. It just ends our struggle with each other, but it doesn't solve anything. Oh, and it profits other people a lot of money. The gun industry and the ethno-religious zealots worming their way into that industry and into right-wing politics, think tanks, and lobbyist organizations like the NRA need to be stopped, need to be held accountable for this madness. I'm standing up and calling out the long-ignored nexus of white nationalism, Christian militantism, and the clear and obvious efforts being made by a convergence of different groups of people from this and other corners of the political ideological echo chamber system to brainwash themselves and other people into believing that only gun violence could ever solve any of the problems that they feel that they're tragically a victim of. I mean, and it goes straight through from like crazy backwood redneck extremists out there in the middle of nowhere that are easily ignored and dismissed as ignorable, all the way up to Tucker Carlson, a perfectly presentable bow tie wearing, not so white man that is manly and worldly and well-traveled. Blah-de-blah-de-blah. But there he is, simping for Putin, literally regurgitating known, verified, KGB originating, disinformation coming from Russia, whilst obviously and egregiously triggering anti-minority, anti-immigrant, people of color sentiment, whilst attempting to maintain a veneer, and it's a thin, flimsy AF veneer of journalistic integrity and fair, balanced representation of both sides. Malarkey. And he knows it. I mean, the fact that he's had to use in his own legal defense in defamation cases, the statement that no one watching his show should ever take him seriously, and they should be intelligent enough to know that they shouldn't take him seriously because the way he acts is clearly meant to be entertainment and not news. But I digress, because that's a whole other issue, right? And I'm not blindly defending the left-wing news media outlets in any way, shape, or form. They got their problematic issues too. But they don't pretend to be what Tucker Carlson pretends to be, right? I get accused of being a leftist all the time, and I'm not, dear friends. And I'm, again, off the thing I was going to finish reading. But I don't pretend to be a leftist. I'm not a leftist. I get accused of being a leftist all the time. You know what I appreciate about the left? They don't pretend to be God's chosen, golden, mighty, worthy of literally gold plate statue building politicians that are mighty spiritual effing warriors, supposedly, with access to the divine truth. The leftists, whatever flaws we might agree on or disagree on about the left, whatever pros or cons we might get into a discussion or debate about, the left side of the entire spectrum of what I call a political echo chamber of political echo chambers, a system of echo chambers within echo chambers. They are not pretending to be Christ's righteous political soldiers. And the right wing is. The right wing does that. And I've got a issue or three with that self-appointed claim. And I cannot abide, as a person with a personal relationship with Yeshua and Magdalene, in a spiritual sense, in a secular, non-denominational, what's that other term for it? It doesn't matter. But I don't belong to any one church. I don't belong to anyone. But I, in my mind, understand myself to choose to willingly explore and have and claim to believe in having a relationship with Yeshua Christos and Maria Magdalene as spiritual entities. We can talk about that in depth at another time. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Catholic. I'm not a leftist Democrat. I'm not a rightist Republican. I am the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, a literary character from another dimension in a book series you've never read yet, and the artists behind that vision. And I say to you, real world friends, it's obvious when we regurgitate back and forth to each other that big industry is evil and corrupt, that it's easy to point fingers at that industry and call it evil and corrupt. But when we don't, and the industry still exhibits symptomology of being under the influence of corruption, what do we do? And I should be very clear. Multiple things can be true at once. Up and down are not mutually exclusive, right? I can respect guns and even sort of like them a little bit. I can enjoy the idea of gun sporting. I would probably draw my lines in different places than others might. But that's a whole different subject. But I am adamant that guns, which are machines of death, the way a samurai sword is described by the sword-making masters as a machine of death, an object explicitly for butchering a human being. And we have to acknowledge that and operate with that understanding, not from a foaming at the mouth, glorifying that as, ooh, isn't that cool? But as like, that means we need to be diligent about how we use it, how we normalize it, how we rationalize it, and how we limit it in our day-to-day lives for the sake of our collective sanity and safety. Especially when this idea that gun violence might solve a problem is coupled with the axiomatic, ideologically programmed brainwashing conditioning that these people over there are not real humans. These people, whatever the scapegoat is, whoever the 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 target might be, they're not really people. They're just whatever, right? And it's there, folks. The hyper vilification and dehumanization and objectification of any group of others is an ideological form of brainwashing manipulation. We will never end gun violence in America if we spend another 100 years having ideological treadmill fights, quote unquote. See the pen and board on the corkboard about why we fight about stuff in politics and why I think fighting about stuff in politics is exactly what we ought not to do, because it's evidently useless. But look around, right? Look around at the exponentially growing, seemingly endless number of mass shooting incidents. Every year gets a little worse. Like traffic on the 91 freeway. No offense, beloved Southern California, 91 neighborhoods that surround the freeway. Like traffic on the 101. Like traffic on the fucking 5. Like, pardon the F-bomb. Like traffic on the 405. Like traffic anywhere in California. It's getting a little bit worse every day. A little bit worse every week. A little bit worse every month. A little bit worse every quarter. A little bit worse every year. A little bit worse every effing decade, for God's sake. And I'm not trying to fearmonger about it. I'm calling out the people that are fearmongering about it and telling you to go buy more guns and be armed to the teeth and be angry at those people. Because that's the bullshit. That's the programming. That's the psyop. Not any of the other things. Those other things are red herring decoy psyops nested within psyops of psyoping you into thinking, because whoever these people are, whatever this force is, and we'll talk about that in a hot second. My theory beyond the fifth wall about what's really at play there. And to some people, my theory is crazier than 9-foot-tall, fire-breathing, laser beam, eye-shooting, baby-eating lizard people from another planet. And it's hilarious to me that they think that, because my theory is rooted, grounded in my ability, in my lifetime of observing and researching and reading about phenomena that people have encountered in their actual real lives. And not indoctrinating myself with ideological religious dogma. There's a difference, folks. There's a common thread connecting all of these incidents going decades back. And that is this. Whoever the perpetrator is got radicalized towards violence, particularly gun violence, as a solution to a perceived problem. Sometimes it's racially motivated, increasingly so it has been, but not always. Sometimes it's just the problem is the state government, that politician, those co-workers, you know what I mean? But the framework underlying the events remains the same. The framework of, like, what seems to have been their motivation. They fell down a rabbit hole of ego traps that seduced them into believing, one, that violence, terminal violence, somehow solves the problem, whatever the perceived problem is. Two, their perceived problem, whatever the perceived problem is, was so egregious that it warranted the use of violence as a tool to end it. And 3, whoever was involved in the issue, the problem, the situation, on the other side, in the way, in between, etc., was not worthy of being perceived of, thought of, categorized, or judged as human and worthy of their own independent life, but rather vilified, dehumanized, objectified, and categorized as something worthy of applying the tool of terminal violence against. And this doesn't happen in isolation, friends. This happens in an echo chamber of echo chambers within echo chambers. So invariably, we get this whiplashing back and forth. And name for me one group that isn't somehow got some little bit of indoctrinatory, content floating around in its circles that is encouraging that group to target and objectify and dehumanize some other group of people. It's everywhere. It's in all quadrants. And it's happening in various degrees of obviousness and various degrees of obfuscated subtlety and various degrees of blunt forcedness and various degrees of sublimated, what's another word for not so obvious? And we stumble back into this troubling, thorny discussion issue of free speech. People have to wrap their brains around the limitations of free speech and stop allowing themselves to get cajoled and convinced that there's some legal protections that go beyond the scope of what is actually in the real scope of law. And then philosophically, like, God-given free speech is that's essentially whatever the fuck you want it to define, because that's how morality works. They can scream at the top of their lungs that it's universal, but ultimately, every individual expressing a moral framework is rationalizing, manipulating, and justifying that moral framework to suit their own needs. That's what humans do. I don't know why, but the mind does that. The solution is in identifying the problem correctly in the first place. That's where we will find a solution, right? To anything, really. My humble opinion. Homelessness, to randomly jump to homelessness like I did recently in another episode, homelessness as a problem, we'll only find the solution when we think beyond the scope of it in the terms that we've defined it as a problem. And then take action to attend to solve and neutralize the real root cause of that problem, like homelessness. Or, to jump back, in this case, escalating gun violence in America. No, the root cause of the problem isn't the heavy metal object sitting in a box somewhere. Of course not. And the bumper stickers and the retort and the self-aggrandizing logistical pretzel mind bending of look at you crazy crazies, talking about, the very fact that people have to indoctrinate themselves with guns don't kill people, people do. It's like, yeah, but the gun helps. To quote Eddie Izzard, but the gun helps. You're never going to kill anyone, are you, just by going rat tat 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 boom bang boo 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 boom ba da 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 da. Like, no one's ever going to die. You'd have to be really dodgy in the heart, fall over from a Heart attack. You know, like, duh. Like, what kind of point is that to make? Talk about whataboutism and whataboutism straw man arguments. Like, the problem is elsewhere, friends. And what I find duplicitous and intellectually dishonest and argumentatively flawed and incompetent is that they then turn to hyper-criminalization of whole swaths of people. Well, if that neighborhood wasn't riddled with criminals, okay, so Wall Street isn't riddled with criminals. At least not today, right now, when you're not pissed off at Wall Street. You can't, like, that's a form of objectification. You can't pretend that you're just being real when you say a whole class of people, are criminal-minded. I've said it before, and I'll say it 1,000 times again, over and over. No group of people, no tribe, no human endeavor, no corporation, no neighborhood, no political party is a monolith of absolute. No individual person is monolithically, absolutely, totalitarily something, right? No individual person and no group of people, however you want to measure that group of people, is pure evil. That's garbage, baby babble, schoolyard level bully talk. And statistically impossible. Categorically, numerically impossible. Some people are dark and messed up, I'll grant you. I mean, hard enough to be called pure evil, right? I mean, the gunman from yesterday's mass shooting event was indeed described as pure evil by some of the people impacted in that community, I'm sure. But that's intellectually lazy and cheap labeling, in my humble opinion. When it comes to calm, rational, sane discussion that's theoretically aimed towards finding a solution. When it comes to being angry and outraged and wanting to express yourself, totally valid. I'm not trying to stomp on that. I'm not trying to rain on that parade. I am saying there's difference and we have to transition, right? We have to get to the place where instead of just being outraged at other people, mind you, what's the point of being outraged at someone who did something horrible because they were outraged? Outrage begetting outrage begetting outrage. Violence begets violence. It's a effing cluster F of vicious reciprocating cycles of toxic negativity. Will you ever find a solution to that by repeating the same things over and over again and doubling down on the exact same cycles, the exact same energies, the exact same frequencies, the exact same trains of thought, the exact same ideological models, the exact same political paradigms, the exact same religious dogma? Of course not. Just like the recent declaration that if you want to eradicate crime, you must first eradicate poverty, is sort of finally catching on and being seen or described and perceived as groundbreaking, radical, earth-shattering, mind-meltingly, news, this revelation. This has been obviously true since the beginning of societal time. Since we started living together in groups of people that didn't choose one another, but chose the same place in praxis, by default or by want or by necessity. As soon as we became people born into villages, cities, and towns, which way? born into villages, towns, and cities. As soon as we became that, we evolved beyond the previous modality wherein which we could consider it justifiable to look with honor towards wanting to or choosing to live by the sword, right? The last days that were arguably like that were the true Wild West days. And that's not the Wild West days most people think, when like California was a state, but everything before that before the country was completed, while we were literally carving up the nation, doing what? Tyrannically butchering the indigenous people with superior firepower. And celebrating and perpetuating and culturally habituating an indoctrinated glorification and sort of addictive relationship, an addictive, admirational, lovey, sexualized relationship with hardware. There's a reason why we've got the term homosexual, and it ain't just to be rude. We have romanticized and wistfully glamorized these machines for murder. That's what they are. Yeah, self-defense by how? By murder. You're going to blow the tops of their heads off so their brains fall out? It's murder. And it's funny because, the same people that will shit bricks and argue till they're red in the face that they have the God-given right to unhindered gun access, and that no legislation shall be passed that regulates or interferes with their ownership of guns, are the same people who are red in the face saying that it's their God-given right to legislate a woman's right to privately choose between herself, her own understanding of divinity, and her doctor what to do about pregnancies and the health risks involved. So the same people that want you to never take their guns away want to impose a tyrannical legislation that will result in forced birth, which will result in a lot of women dying, because birth is risky. Already talked about that, right? And as I pointed out in a previous episode, these issues are weaponized against us. What? Don't believe me? What just happened yesterday in Buffalo, New York? This guy may not have been talking about women in any way, shape, or form, but the entire MAGA Q, racial paranoia thing is realer than real, and it's older than MAGA. That's why I laugh at the Putin simps. Hello, Putin simps. Oh, there's a couple of hundred self-declared extremist right-wingers. Oh, it's different when you call... What are Nazis? Excuse me. Let's pause really quickly, because there's a lot of confluence in my mind with all of these issues. What is a Nazi? For reals. It isn't a German person. That's rude, right? It isn't just a soldier in Adolf Hitler's army from the World War II, right? That's way too limited. It is a ethno-nationalist Christian militant with a toxic addiction to solving problems through gun violence. Dun, dun, dun. Now, a lot of white people commit racially motivated gun violence without ever once calling themselves Nazis. But I think it's worth pointing out that there's this Venn diagram, painfully awkward confluence overlap between, say, Putin simps cheering on Vladimir Putin acting like a Nazi under the pretextual excuse of hunting down Nazis in a country where there's 40 million total population and there's 300 known registered right-wing political ideologues. And the same people who in America are trying to regulate a woman's uterus and completely deregulate guns whilst invoking Christ and complaining about white replacement theory. I'm not trying to call anyone a Nazi here, folks, because that's retarded. Sorry, that's rude. We don't use that word anymore. That's ridiculous, which is really what we meant. We just wanted a slightly harder consonanted, a slightly harder sounding word with stronger consonants. That's why we co-opted the word retarded in that usage that was popular in the 80s and 90s. And for it, we apologize. There were those of us who used it in an intelligent way that wasn't rude and bullying, and there are the people who just used it to bully. These are wedge issues of intractable conflict creation. In other words, they create conflicts that are intractable, unsolvable. And they drive one side towards militant extremism so that their only perceivable solution ends up being some form of militant gun violence. Then the rest of us have to argue about whether or not we need to arm up and strap on and lock and load to be ready for the whatever the fuck shitstorm they're going to bring. Which arguably they're not even bringing because they're just paranoidly angry at something that's not even really happening. There is no replacement of white voters. Is the diversity mix of America changing? Of course. But the world is changing that way. As a foreigner to this country, I can assure you, you don't magically automatically get handed voting rights. That's ridiculous. I could never vote in this country unless I went to the trouble of becoming a citizen. And yes, there are advocates that joyfully encourage anyone that wants to become an American citizen to become an American citizen, because at some point in the wobbly, rocky, topsy-turvy roller coaster ride of development of the American self-image, we looked at in horror and disgrace at the racism of our founding fathers and the long journey it took their progeny, because there's also the really idiotic misconception, which makes zero sense because they arguably want slavery to come back, some of them, but that the founding fathers themselves fought for slavery to end. No, it took other people beyond the actual literal founding fathers to finally bring that to an end and bring about some tiny baby step towards equality. There is a very real threat, and it's intrinsically intertwined with a kind of amosexual, like sexualized love of guns that's disgusting and in my opinion moronic. Because if you learn any lesson from any attempt at an actual sort of study of history, from the samurai swords to the land wars of Europe and everything in between, the solutions are not found in any of these tools of death that we've invented. We've invented them. We must deal with them. We must cope with them. We must find ways to prevent their abuse and misuse. And ultimately, friends, more important than any of those arguments about how to regulate them, we must heal the spiritual trauma at the root core of the chain of events of causology, of the cause and effect chain of events, that I think is clearly at the root cause of all of this, is ancient karmic spiritual trauma all around and up in violence, going as far back as, allegorically speaking, figuratively speaking, when Cain killed Abel, or Abel killed Cain, depending on which universe you're in. There's also the much neglected universe in which their sister, who was erased from the book, kills both of them. That one's a trip, because it doesn't turn out to be any better for society or for the world. That's like toxic. That's like the universes in which toxic feminine, toxic, whatever, what would be the right conjugation? Toxic femininity, toxic womanhood, toxic masculinity, womaninity, toxic femaleness is expressed and lived out in a whole range of probability, waveform, function, variable wormholes of probability, through lines. But I digress. I'm way far afield. We have to help each other see that there's truly nonsensical content out there that delivers a message that's an effort to trick people into ignoring these incidents in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Either as total hoax that never happened, or as staged events created using actors and dummies, or as semi-real false flag events that they never really quite explain whether or not they think people really die or don't die, or what the point is if they really do die, what the objective is. But there's an attempt to minimize, normalize, and dismiss, sweep under the rug, that these things keep happening, that people keep choosing to gear up and target people based on political ideology or skin color. And to do so unprovoked, uninvited, to strangers, to innocent, unarmed civilians, is as egregious, as morally wrong, as morally unacceptable as the war crimes being committed by the Russian army in Ukraine, and the war crimes or the crimes against humanity being committed by Israel in occupied territories in Palestine, and any of the 35 plus other world conflicts going on. Like, have you checked into Mali lately? Have you seen what's going on in Syria? Thailand's a mess. What's that other country I was just considering? Wow, they're going through some stuff. It's no joke. And to sit around turning a blind eye, to sit around acquiescing and complaining about all the other things, the things that are distractionary, the things that are obviously wedge issues, the things that are not solving the problems. Take a moment. Ask yourself or your friends this. If your favorite camp of thinkers, whatever, your favorite argument was won by the side that you were on, right? If let's say you were, theoretically speaking, dear listener, whoever you are, dear artificial intelligence machine reviewing this for content appropriateness in the future, let's pretend you were pro-mask in the pro-mask, anti-mask debate. What would be solved if that debate was categorically, undeniably, completely, soundly won by your side? Would it really, truly deliver us complete and absolute freedom from the virus? No, because it's just a mitigation measure. It's a better than nothing risk reduction tool. It's not an ideological belief manifesto that must be adhered to. Conversely, exactly the same question to the anti-mask side. Would anything have been solved? They wouldn't have been oppressing my freedom. Like, really, dude? A piece of paper oppresses your freedom? A piece of cloth is... But it's so hard to... Really? It's hard to breathe? But my oxygen level... That was debunked. People who have trouble with their oxygen levels, who literally read low oxygen levels, probably have oxygen levels independent of the mask. And that's why the mask might cause noticeable issue measurement differences. But a normal, healthy individual without, issues, testing the oxygen intake level, I've done it. I did it myself. I've literally watched plenty of other people do it. With multiple kinds of masks, multiple masks on. I digress. The point is, either side winning the social cultural war argument would be an empty win, would achieve nothing. It would change nothing, would it? Not if, how do you measure that win? That's the other thing. Who wins in the pro-gun, anti-gun debate? Nobody. No individual person. No one that's just a person, a citizen in the world. You know who wins in the whole mess? Those industries or those corporations raking in the absurdly huge profits. You know who loses? Everyone impacted by the gun violence. Everyone dead because of a bullet. Everyone grieving a loss because of someone's mismanaged outrage. And the need to believe that using a gun would solve whatever perceived problem was outraging them. That's the level of discourse we need to be having. Right? How do we cure? How do we heal? How do we attend to the broken, bitter spirits, hearts, minds, souls of people we have yet to identify out there in our neighborhoods, living amongst us, that are that messed up, that they are convinced their next move must be gun violence in some shape or form, right? How do we heal the spiritual corruption at the core of this insidious movement of manipulative content clearly peddling a sublimated and obfuscated white nationalist Christian militant message that those human beings over there deserve to be eradicated? Those are the questions we should be asking and discussing. And frankly, it's a tragedy to me that the discussion is never allowed to go beyond that. And when you try to do that with supposedly reasonable people, with self-proclaimed critical thinkers, they just brush it off and dismiss you like you're some mentally, incapacitated. Like, what? We cannot continue to refuse to discuss the pain and suffering of the spiritual trauma that reeks at the core of all of these overlapping issues. If you step back and look at the Venn diagram of all of the crazy at that dark overlapping center, there is the need to heal. Not this group, not that billionaire, not those political ideologues, not those particular philosophers, not that race, not this religion or that religion. The need to heal. The species-wide spiritual need to heal ourselves, to help heal each other. And that, show me where on the gun the healing bits happen. Show me how the bullet helps heal a person. Yes. We need weapons to defend ourselves against those so fraught in their human mind-body dysmorphia that they believe no one else is alive, no one else is worthy of freedom, no one else is worthy of autonomy, no one else is worthy of the respect it takes to not butcher them. Of course, we need methods and tools for self-defense. I'm never saying otherwise. What I am saying is, if we do not heal the species, this problem will only mutate and evolve in ways we probably will not enjoy. If we don't stop pointing fingers and blaming and, vilifying even the perpetrators, who are in their own way victims of the kind of indoctrination and mind fuckery that it takes to get a person there, right? No well-balanced, healed, loved, appreciated individual can be led astray from their center to a place so shallow that they'll be like, yeah, I think such and such people deserve to be treated with physical violence, to be exterminated by gun violence, right? It takes extreme conditioning. It isn't something that's going to happen because they watched a few movies. It's going to take programming. And it's real, and it's happening, and it's out there. And it's been lurking in the fringes of American society since the beginning. It was never magically gone. It was never magically replaced by a progressive, diverse utopia. It has always repeatedly reared its ugly head, shocked and amazed people, and then quietly been just forgotten about again. And for reasons I cannot explain to you, that's what Donald Trump left the Democratic Party to tap into. But we'll have to leave that for a further point of discussion. We'll be back again with some Good Morning Trumptopia to delve into the Trumptopian level of extra that this all gets to. But in the meantime, friends, I thank you for tuning in. I thank you for giving this admittedly eccentric, experimental, somewhat exotic podcast show that is probably not quite like what you expect podcasts to be like. And so for those of you who've stuck it out and are continuing to explore the show and its many interrelated dimensions of the Zeboverse, the deepest of thanks. And if you're new to the show or still sort of just skimming the surface, I humbly invite you to dive deeper and dig further and go broader and check it out even more. And now, let us purge the collective mind space with a little bit more of that a DJ Zed music from earlier. And then some final concluding thoughts and our outro. Dear friends, I will brush the slate for one moment. DJ Zed, thank you so much. Contemplate this with me, friends. 3,000 years. Violence has only escalated. 5,000 years before that, society mocked and ridiculed the Buddha. And violence only escalated since then. The last 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 years worth of history is just us enduring horrific violence and perpetuating it on each other. Untold wars, endless sagas, and first of all, ironic and yet romantification, romanticization, nostalgification of war and prowess. fear that it will only be when we are once again able to see in each other the divine oneness and reality that we have always been each other. We have always been one another. We will always be another me in another you. I think it is then, right, when we achieve that at an intellectual level, at an emotional level, at a spiritual level, and it's a deep knowing, not just a blind agreeing to the statement, but a deep knowing that I am another you. You are another me. And I am because you are. I exist because you exist. You exist because I exist. And that relationship is the fundamental relativistic bond that ties us all together as a cosmic tribe, as a species-wide being. We are a singular being exploring an infinite array of multiple forms. And each little vessel gets caught up in a lifespan, and that lifespan causes us to experience a sort of mental identity as an individual. But that mental image of our individual lifespan in that body avatar is not that which is the thing that is me. That is not my memory of my life here in this body. However full, complete, or weird and vaguely shambly and difficult to remember it may be, depending on the day and the week and the month and the strain of weed I'm smoking. That is not what I am. It is what I've experienced. I'm not my name. I'm not my history. I am not my ideological constructs. But in this world, people don't root down and connect to that, and therefore are not grounded in that. And I humbly propose to you, dear friends, it's a good place to start. Be the change you want to see in the world. Don't go, forgive me, and I know that anyone can quickly interpret this as a form of hypocrisy. I was about to say, don't go lecturing other people. Go being the change. Go sit with yourself and ground yourself in the phenomenological reality of our spiritual oneness. I say that because I try to be that, and this is my testimony. This is my op-ed. I don't just tell people, believe in some idea that these are the rules, and then do whatever the fuck I want and don't follow the rules. There are no rules. That's the bitch. That's the catch-22 about this universe. There are no rules. There are identifiable, scientifically measurable, phenomenological patterns and event modalities that we commonly call, in our language, laws of nature. But there are no rules. And in some of my horror fiction sidebar spin-off side stories, I explore that in really blunt and silly and weird and gross graphic ways, which I won't hear. But like, there is nothing stopping, to speak purely in the theoretical. In the universe, there's nothing stopping an axe murderer from becoming an axe murderer, except for people who step up and say, you're not allowed to do that because it sucks, and it benefits no one except your own sick pleasure at chopping people up. And that's just gross and wrong and rude and immoral. So we are going to put our own lives in danger to stop you. Right? That's how it works. That's why we say that free will is limited by the bubble of the, emanating out from center of the rights of all other living beings. And yet, we find ourselves in a historical chapter where all kinds of 50 shades of not so mentally stable Christianity are rearing up and hyper normalizing themselves. And I don't mean to be rude, and I don't mean to call all Christians, crazy. I am, to a certain extent, still a Christian, right? I've said it before on the show. I would consider myself a Christian, except that I don't know any Christian church that would accept me completely in totality, considering what I know in my head and would say about my opinion or thoughts on Christ and Magdalene. Maybe the closest would be the Unitarians or the UU church, or the other one that's really closely affiliated to them, whose name I forget. Doesn't matter. They're super cool too, but I don't know for sure. And I'm not trying to call them out or poke fun at them at all in any way, shape, or form. My point is, most standard American Christian churches, evangelical Christians, born again Christians, anything, especially any Christians that run around saying the Catholics aren't Christians, they're not going to accept me and my declaration of being a follower of Christ. But arguably, in my humble opinion, if Yeshua Christos effing Merkabah down here right now on his chariot of light, because his chakras are all fully activated and he can intermittently manifest pure being of light and embodiment of that light into a physical body, he'd show up here and be like, what on earth are you people doing? That's got absolutely nothing to do with any of the things I said, any of the things I taught, any of the things I was trying to teach you. And they would probably not recognize him or acknowledge him as the Christ embodiment that he is and that they pretend to understand. Because they don't. As evidenced by their words and actions. So, because it really, really chaps my hide how many, historically speaking, how many militant, weaponized butchers of innocent people have claimed to be believers in Christ. It's kind of gross. It's kind of disgusting. And not the least of which the Nazis, right? Not the least of which Putin and the Russian army. Albeit, of course, they're Russian Orthodox, which all the, mucky muck Christian naysayers will say aren't real Christians, but whatever. They think they are, is my point. So, in response to that, my favorite meme is the old school Jesus meme. With admittedly white Jesus. It'd be great if it was more of a Palestinian, Afro-influenced Jesus up there on that image. But, I mean, that baby he's holding is the whitest Palestinian Jew baby I've ever seen depicted by art. But some of the other people look a little bit more of the region. But the important part is not that. Let's not get sidebarred. Because one of the valid rationalizations for depicting a variant of Jesus different from his actual ethnic roots would be to make him approachable to other cultures as they, discover his teachings for the very first time, or his hijacked teachings, shall we say? Because all of that, like colonial Jesus, comes from the Catholic Church. No matter what anybody else says about the Catholic Church, they were Christianity. They were, in fact, they coined the term the whole of Christendom, as in the Christian kingdom, right? Like they were Christianity for the 2.5, almost 3,000 years that they exclusively controlled the entire narrative of what Christ was and is and means and meant and taught and teaches. But I digress. In this meme, and I think this is one of the greatest memes ever, because it really it really should hit home to any intellectually honest person declaring themselves a Christian whilst also spewing endless hate at others. Okay, and I quote, okay, so here's what I want you to do. Love others just as I have loved you. Take care of them and do not judge them. From the crowd, but what if they're gay or worship other gods or don't worship any god at all? And, the bottom in all caps, did I stutter? The nexus point of the crazy cuckoo nutjob shenanigans roller coaster ride of what the hellery that's going, like, what the hell is all this that's going on in the United States of America, seems to me, and others, I'm not the only one, seems to be deeply associated with a movement of white nationalist Christian militantism that would like to slide up into America's geopolitical DMs and inseminate her and impregnate her and then force her to carry pregnancy to term of some new form of normalized, militant, white nationalist, Christian, governmental, integration into, from a top-down sort of way. And we can't get distracted by Trump because it's bigger than Trump. He just tapped into that sentiment as a tool. I don't even know that he realized what he was doing. I don't even know that it was his idea to do it, right? It wouldn't surprise me one bit to find out that it was something he was, inspired to do by others. But it opened a tap. It caused a sea change in the momentum of America's public self-identification. And I'm here to speak out, right? Because I think there's a lot of people in America and elsewhere abroad that would be in a little bit of shock and denial about to what extent there is a postmodern white nationalist Christian militant problem in America and has been for decades, right? Now, there are plenty of people ringing that bell, plenty of people saying, you guys, hey, we can't just pretend that this is not going on. But this sort of thing culminates and peaks every once in a while, and the confluence of events right now is really making it really painfully obvious to me, right? As one of my more recent memes likes to point out, like, how do you tell the difference between an evil religious terrorist and a God-fearing, well-equipped good guy? I mean, once the shooting starts, like, and the death begins, like, what does any of that mean? Given that in both cases, like, if you're talking about, in the meme I'm invoking in my mind, there was two female armed religious extremists, right? And it's like, what's the difference? Tell me what the difference is between this lady holding a Bible, standing in front of an American flag, holding a fully automatic weapon of war, and this other lady that people would immediately vilify as jihadist, doing the exact same thing as the first lady, standing with a Quran in one hand, and a fucking AR-15 or whatever the hell it was. I don't know what kind of semi or fully automatic weapon, but it's one of those big ones. I don't hate guns. I don't know a lot about their names. I know about classifications and how they work. And I know how much fun they are to shoot occasionally under the right conditions. And I appreciate that in video games, they're extra fun to shoot because no one can possibly ever get hurt. Sidebar. Gaming is not a crime. So it is not duplicitous or hypocritical or intellectually dishonest of me to be advocating what I'm advocating about the real world gun problem we have. And also saying, but leave us the fuck alone over here in Gamerland. Most of us are really painfully aware of the gun violence problem and appreciate that this is sort of fantasy and escapist, and none of us are reaching towards guns. It's other people. It's the radicalization that happens at the confluence of white nationalism and militant Christianity. That's when you go the step too far. The video games and the movies aren't the gateway drug. Although, I mean, it is a little sus, as the kids say. It is a little sus that the whole world loves John Wick and thinks that there's some kind of genius in that. And while, I mean, yeah, I get it, there's visual stunningness. My own argument from the esports side is that, like, the fun thing about battle royale, squad, or individual team-based, first-person, third-person, whatever the fuck, video games where you compete against other individuals in real time, vis-a-vis the fictional fantasy of Bloodsport, right? In a virtual sense, it's all about the skill. It's all about the technical, tactical skill, which you could not grind at, you could not execute in the real world in the same way without literally creating some sort of meat grinder of death cult. And that's an idea that I toy with at the center of my book series, Guntopia 1, 2, and 3. Working titles, don't steal them. Which are part and parcel to the video game, like Addicted to Dragons stuff, and the main through line. It's all interrelated. The main through line in the 0 Hour series. So we need to clarify our language, first of all. There are lots of issues on the corkboard about how that statement applies to politics, spirituality, and religion. We need to clarify and specify and stop mucking up our language. We need to call out and denounce the manipulative content. Language that is designed to seduce people into vilifying and objectifying others so that then they are likely to approve of committing violence against them. We need to vigilantly call that out. Because the people sliding down that slippery slope throat of that rabbit hole, they don't know that they're being manipulated by intellectually dishonest, manipulative content. But if you call it out and go, one instance of someone seeing someone else go, whoa, 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 that's ridiculous. That is unacceptable, psychologically manipulative content that's neither one really true, right? And clearly leads down a dark path towards something that is unacceptable, morally wrong. The more we do that with the memes and whatnot, in a serious way, in a respectful way, maybe even in a joking way. Now, it gets weird and complicated because, so, James Bond, is that the same kind of content? Some people already believe that it doesn't matter what kind of movie, all movies, pure evil. The spawn of Satan in celluloid format. And I can't abide by that. I can't jump on that bandwagon. I can't just blindly regurgitate that statement. And there is something fun about, I don't know, name of action-adventure movie, right? There's something fun and enjoyable and fascinating about art that artfully handles this stuff, and entertainment that entertainingly handles this stuff. There's also some content out there that's just like, wow, that's just obscene. That's just true amosexual gun slobbery. And it's on the guns. And it's like, wow, gross. Like, not literally, but figuratively. Sorry, that was probably a bit too much. I'm worked up, though, because, like, for reals, like, since the early 90s, I've been like, you guys, this is a little bit messed up, dark, and twisted. And the political fight is really sort of just smoke and mirrors. And the real issue isn't the guns. The real issue isn't even the industry becoming its own toxic version of itself as a profiteering problem. The issue is whatever the effing... Oh, time is almost up. I better wrap up the show, apparently. I'm running out of time. That's never happened to me before. The issue stems at that deep karmic spiritual place, right? That was there between Cain and Abel. And or their twin sister, depending on which universe you're from. At any rate, folks, thank you for enduring what may be one of the longest episodes in the history of the show. I humbly invite you to continue listening and to check out the 5 years worth of content I've been posting here through Sprecher and its affiliate system of platforms for podcast catching. And I humbly invite you to visit solo.to/Mr. Zeppo to visit some of the other projects that are part of the Zeppo brand. Peace out. Till next time. Here's the outro music that officially marks the end of the show.
And that is the latest breaking news. We now return you to your regularly scheduled brainwashing. Thank you for listening.
Wow, time just flew. I am truly exhausted. Namaste, folks. Go, turn inwards, meditate, forgive, and heal thyself.